This is both the smallest and the lightest weight lens that I've ever seen that gives you that big widescreen image that you've seen in your favorite Hollywood movies. And I think this lens was originally developed strictly to use on drones because it is so small and light, and it even uses carbon fiber in the lens to keep the weight down. And I have 3 of these lenses here. They were provided to me by Suray at no cost to myself. This isn't a paid or sponsored video, but I think it was a good opportunity to talk about this style lens and how you see them in your favorite Hollywood movies and how you might be using them at home on your own cameras to get this same look. If you want some more information on the lenses, I will put some links in the description down below. And the difference between this lens and any normal lens is this lens has a barrel element in it, which gives you that widescreen image. And if you look at the front of the lens, it might be hard for you in the camera to see the barrel element, but what you will see is the iris of the lens is an oval shape rather than a circle shape. And that's because you are looking through that barrel element and it is making that circle stretched into an oval. But interestingly, when we look through the back of the lens, all of a sudden it's a circle. So if you were looking through a standard lens, you would see your iris looking like this, like a circle. But when you look through this lens through the front, which has gone through that barrel element, then you can see that it has turned into an oval, and it does that to everything in your image. It is taking your image and giving you a wider field of view in the width of what you're seeing. And this is a very interesting look. It was first introduced in a movie in 1953 called Robe. And if you look at that, you get this kind of interesting, somewhat immersive, almost surreal type look that you see in many Hollywood movies nowadays. And this is caused by using this type of lens, which is called an anamorphic lens. Now, if we look at what anamorphic lenses did back then when they were shooting that movie and many of the classic movies, using film, they had these barrel elements in it. And when that image came through the barrel element, it would see wider than what the normal lens would see. And because of that, once the image hit the sensor, everything was squished together and looked squeezed this way. So everybody was kind of tall and skinny. And then to return it to its normal state or the way it should look when they would project it on the movie screen, they used what was called a de-squeeze element. And this was an extra piece of glass that they put in front of the projector, and it took it and it stretched that image back out. Now, nowadays we do that in editing. We stretch it back out, but it is a very, very similar process. Now, this set of lenses that I have here have a 1.6 times squeeze factor, and that does something else very interesting to your footage. To start with, I've got the 35mm lens in the middle here. That gives me a 35mm field of view this way, and the way that the person looks and the image compression and the background blur is all in line with what you would normally see out of a 35mm lens. But because we have a 1.6 times squeeze factor and we have this cylindrical barrel element, we're actually seeing a field of view width-wise of 21mm. So this is a 21mm lens as far as the field of view goes this way, but it is a 35mm field of view this way. 21 and 35 are very, very different things. And you only get this interesting look with anamorphic lenses. So if you're watching a movie and you're like, there's something a little bit different about this, there's something that's immersing me in the scene or I'm feeling like I'm kind of sucked into the scene, this is what they call the anamorphic look. And this also affects which lenses you might use. So to start with, the 35mm, if this was just a standard lens, a 35mm is a pretty standard walk-around lens. If you've got a full-frame camera, shooting at 35mm is considered the most normal lens and most universally useful lens to use. But when you take 35mm and you do the 1.6 times squeeze, and we get a 21mm field of view width-wise, now we've got a lens that is really an epic landscape, establishing shot, widescreen. And this lens, I think for that reason, was developed originally to be used on a drone. So you get this super widescreen image. So why 35mm is a super useful do everything lens when we're talking about a normal lens, A 35mm with 1.6 times squeeze factor is actually an ultra wide lens, and it probably is only used in very specific scenarios. And the next lens in the set is the 50mm lens, and this is probably my favorite lens of the kit because I think it is the most universally useful once we take that 1.6 times squeeze factor in. So once again, we got a 50mm field of view this way, and we've got a 31mm field of view this way. So at 50mm, this is a very standard lens. In fact, if we look back at the old film cameras, they almost always came with 50mm lenses on it. It's just a very standard field of view. And so 50mm is great for taking photos or videos of people or objects or cars or whatever. It really gives a nice flattering image. 31mm is wide, not quite ultra wide, but is wide. And what this does, allows us to get a person in the scene and make you feel like the image of them is still flattering, but it is a more immersive image because of that wider field of view. And so when I look at all these lenses, the 50mm is the one I use the most. I also think it has the best image quality. It's my favorite as far as the type and way it distorts the image. So I think 50mm to me is my favorite lens of the batch. And then the final one is the 75mm. Now, once again, we're going to take the squeeze factor in, and we've got a 75mm field of view this way and 46 this way. And you could argue that this could actually be the only lens you need to shoot a movie as well, because 46mm is quite wide and is quite useful. But to me, this is a little bit more of a hero lens, a little bit more of a person or a subject type lens, a little bit more of isolating something in a scene. But because it is wide, that 46mm field of view width-wise, it still has a lot more use and is a lot more useful than a standard 75mm lens. And there's a couple of different key character traits to the images beyond the fact that it's widescreen, because even using a standard lens, they can crop top and bottom and give you a widescreen image. But there are also some other image characters which are kind of image character flaws, but they have become seen as desirable because this type of lens is used in Hollywood and it looks pretty cool. And so what really would be an image character flaw is kind of seen as a bonus or a character of these lenses in movies. And the first one is oval bokeh. And that is when you have specular highlights in the back of your scene or in the background, it is oval shaped instead of round. And if we look through the front of the lens, we can see why that would be, because now the iris appears oval shaped as well. And that creates this oval bokeh. And you will see this all the time. Now that I've mentioned it, if you've never looked for it, look at your favorite Hollywood movies, Netflix, what have you. You will see this all the time. And it's kind of a fun thing. Then you'll know, hey, that's shot on an anamorphic lens. The other thing you're going to see is lens streaks or lens flare that goes across the screen in a big, wide, long bar. Now, in a lot of movies, this is a blue flare. They almost were always blue flares in the past. Now they're changing it so you can get a golden flare lens or you can get a neutral flare lens. The lenses I've got here actually have a neutral flare, so they take on whatever the color of the light that is hitting the lens. It will flare in that color. Anytime you see these anamorphic streaks or anamorphic flares, you know that that movie is being shot on anamorphic lenses. The other thing that you won't always see in all anamorphic movies or with anamorphic shots, but for the most part, because you are stretching this image, as you get to the side of frame, you will often see additional distortion. Now that can be barrel or pin cushion distortion, and you will often see that those edges aren't as soft and as crisp as the center of frame. This can be used creatively when you are trying to frame a subject. Just keep them in that sharp area of frame, and the sides are softer, and so they form part of the surrounding environment, so you can see them and they give you that immersive look, but they aren't distracting because they are somewhat softer and your eye is going to be drawn more to the center of frame where the image is sharper. The only thing you do have to keep in mind when you are composing images with lenses like this is you really can't put a person or an object or a subject at the corner of frame because it is going to look like it's out of focus or distorted and weird. So that is a thing that you do have to keep in mind when you are composing with anamorphic lenses. So next time you're watching a movie, see if you can pick. Is it shot with a standard lens or an anamorphic lens? Do we have oval bokeh? Do we have lens flares streaking across the screen? Do we have softer image quality on the side? Do I feel like there's some weird immersive, I'm being sucked into the image thing going on? These are all signs that your video that you're watching was shot on an anamorphic lens. Now, if you're trying to shoot cinematic video on a budget, I've just thrown a video on screen now. I think this is a great representation of what anamorphic lenses can do, but I also have some tips in there on how to get cinematic looking footage with basically no experience and the gear that you've got right now.